Why conversations feel harder after 50 isn't a topic about being cranky, antisocial, or not tolerating people anymore. That's the lazy explanation. And it's actually keeping people stuck because it makes them feel like they're turning into someone they don't want to be. The truth is much more interesting and honestly, much kinder. Conversations can feel harder after 50 because your nervous system, your identity, and your emotional economy are changing in ways that are not only normal, but often deeply intelligent. When you understand what's really happening, you stop trying to force yourself back into an older version of connection and start learning how to connect in a way that feels safe, honest, and sustainable. So let's start with the part most people don't realize that they're dealing with because it's not obvious on the surface. The first reason conversations feel harder after 50 is that your nervous system becomes more exacting about what it considers safe, worth it, and sustainable. When you're younger, you can spend hours in conversations that are messy, circular, emotionally loaded, or subtly performative, and you might walk away tired, but not confused about it. You just assume that's what conversation is. You assume relationships are supposed to take effort and you push through the discomfort because your system is still wired for adaptation and belonging at almost any cost. And as the years pass, your system begins to prioritize regulation over adaptation. This shift is huge and it changes everything about what conversation feels like inside your body. A conversation can be polite and still feel unsafe to your nervous system if it contains certain signals like pressure to perform, pressure to explain yourself, pressure to keep the peace, or pressure to manage someone else's feelings. What's different after 50 is that you don't ignore these signals as easily. Your body notices them faster. Your shoulders begin to tighten faster. Your breath changes faster. Your patience shortens faster. Not because you're less capable, but because you're more aware of the cost. This can be confusing because nothing bad is happening in the conversation. You might even tell yourself that you're being dramatic. You might think that you should be able to handle it because you've handled far worse. But that's the point. You've handled far worse. Your nervous system has decades of data now, and it starts to treat certain conversational patterns like they're not worth repeating. It recognizes energy drains that used to feel normal. It recognizes emotional labor that you used to offer automatically. It recognizes subtle invalidation that you used to brush off to keep things smooth. After 50, your body is less willing to pay for connection with dysregulation. This is one of the biggest reasons a simple conversation can feel exhausting now, even when no one did anything wrong. If you've spent years being the steady one, the listener, the mediator, the one who knows how to keep things calm, then you also spent years teaching your nervous system that relationships require you to manage the room. That becomes a default setting. Later in life, that default starts to fail, not because you're broken, but because you're no longer willing to disappear inside it. And conversation requires you to monitor tone, anticipate reactions, soften your truth, or keep someone comfortable. Your nervous system reads that as effort that you don't have the same appetite for. If you've ever found yourself coming home after a totally normal social event and thinking, why do I feel like I ran a marathon? This is what's happening. Your body is doing the math in the background. It's calculating tension, responsibility, and emotional output. It's deciding whether the connection is mutual or whether you carried it. And even if you love the people involved, even if you enjoyed parts of it, your system may still be telling you that the cost was high. As we move deeper, there's another piece here that's even more identity level, and it can make conversations feel harder in a very specific way. After 50, many people experience what I call conversational friction, not because they're fighting with others, but because they're fighting with their role. You may still be operating in relationships where people expect you to show up as the version of you they've always known. They expect you to be agreeable. They expect you to be available. They expect you to explain, to soothe, to accommodate, to make it easy. But you're not the same person that you were at 35, 40, or even 45 because life has done what life does. It has refined you. This is where identity consolidation comes in. Earlier in life, identity is more fluid. You are becoming, you are trying on roles, you are absorbing feedback, often unconsciously. Conversations are part of how you learn who you are because you're constantly adjusting to fit, to belong, to succeed, to be understood. You might have tolerated endless debating, endless explaining, endless small talk, endless emotional dumping, because conversation wasn't just connection. It was navigation. It was survival. It was your way of staying plugged into the social fabric. Later in life, identity becomes more internal. You stop needing everyone to understand you for you to trust yourself. You stop needing to be liked by everyone to feel safe. You stop needing to defend your choices as if you're still asking permission to live your own life. That shift is incredibly freeing, but it also changes how conversations feel. Conversations that revolve around proving, persuading, or performing start to feel pointless. Conversations that revolve around old expectations start to feel irritating. Conversations that require you to argue for your own experience start to feel insulting, even if no one intended it that way. This can show up in the most ordinary situations. Someone asks a question that isn't really a question. It's a challenge dressed up as curiosity. Someone teases you in a way that used to slide by, but now it lands as disrespect. Someone gives you advice that you didn't ask for, and instead of nodding politely, you feel your body stiffen. Someone turns every conversation into a debate, and where you used to play along, now you feel a quiet, steady noise up inside you. The hardest part is that you may not even want to say anything, you just want out. This is why some people say, I don't know what's wrong with me. I just don't feel like talking anymore. But it's not that you don't feel like talking, you just don't feel like performing. It don't feel like negotiating your right to be yourself. You don't feel like paying a nervous system tax for conversations that don't nourish you. That's not becoming cold, that's you becoming clear. As we keep going, there's a third identity level shift that changes conversation after 50. And this one comes with a lot of emotional nuance. It's the shift from connection as obligation to connection as a choice. Earlier in life, a lot of our relationships and conversations are built on obligation, even if we don't call it that. We show up because we're supposed to. We call because it's expected. We engage because we don't want to be rude. We keep the conversation going because silence feels awkward. We stay on the phone too long because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings. We attend events because we don't want to disappoint anyone. After 50, many people begin to ask a question they didn't used to ask, and it can be unsettling at first. The question is, do I actually want to be here? That sounds simple, but it's not. Because when you start living from choice instead of obligation, you feel the difference between true connection and role-based connection. You feel the difference between mutual presence and emotional caretaking. You feel the difference between being seen and being used, even subtly. And once you feel that difference, you cannot unfeel it. This is where conversations can become emotionally complicated because you may still love people who only know how to connect through old dynamics. Some people connect by complaining. Some people connect by fixing. Some people connect by probing. Some people connect by putting you in your old place without realizing that they're doing it. And when you stop participating in the old pattern, it can create distance, confusion, or even a little grief. That grief matters, and it's one of the reasons that conversations feel harder. Not because conversation is bad, but because you're aware of what it costs and what it means. You may realize that certain conversations used to work because you did more than your share. You carried the emotional tone. You kept things light. You asked the questions. You listened longer. You made it comfortable. And now you're not willing to do that anymore. But you also don't want to become someone who shuts down or withdraws from everyone. This is the tender middle space after 50. It's not just boundaries. It's not just protecting your peace. It's the emotional process of recalibrating how you relate without losing your humanity. It's learning to choose connection that feels mutual while still being kind. It's letting some relationships adjust to the new you without turning it into a crisis. It's accepting that some people will grow with you and some won't, and that doesn't have to be a war. Let's have a real life example because this is where it gets real. You're talking to someone that you care about, and they keep circling the same problem. Same story, same frustration, same emotional loop. 10 years ago, you might have tried to rescue them from it. You might have offered solutions. You might have talked them through it for the 10th time. After 50, though, you might find yourself irritated, not because you don't care, but because you recognize that the conversation isn't connection anymore. It's repetition. It's emotional recycling. And your nervous system knows that no amount of listening is going to create change if the person isn't ready to change. So you do something different. You listen for a while and then you redirect. Or you end the call earlier than you used to. Or you say, I love you, but I just don't have it in me for this right now. And then you sit there feeling guilty because the old version of you equated endurance with love. The old version of you is learning that love without limits becomes resentment. That guilt is a normal part of identity change. It's the nervous system adjusting to new rules. It's your emotional wiring catching up to your values. And it can make conversations feel harder because now you're not only managing the conversation itself, you're managing your internal response to do it differently. There's a fourth layer that makes conversation feel harder after 50, and this is one of the most underestimated ones. It's the shift in what you actually need from connection. As identity becomes more internal, many people start craving depth over performance. They crave honesty over politeness. They crave calm over stimulation. They crave being able to sit in a room with someone and not have to fill the air. They crave conversations that feel real. Here's the problem. A lot of people never learned how to do real. They learned how to do socially acceptable. They learned how to do productive. They learned how to do entertaining. They learned how to do fine. They learned how to keep things moving. And those skills can create a lot of conversation, but not a lot of nourishment. After 50, when your system is hungry for nourishment, these kinds of conversations feel like empty calories. They don't harm you, but they don't feed you either. And your body, it knows the difference now. This is why small talk can feel like sandpaper. Not because small talk is evil, but because it demands energy without providing meaning. It requires you to stay on, to respond correctly, to keep it flowing, and your nervous system is sitting there thinking, for what? If you're someone who has spent decades being competent, responsible, and emotionally aware, you might find that you no longer want to spend your limited energy performing connection. You want connection that makes you feel more like yourself, not less. This is why so many conversations that involve subtle disrespect, even if it's wrapped in humor, hit harder now. Live long enough to recognize what's underneath things. You hear the tone, you feel the subtext, you notice the little power dynamics. And once you notice them, it's hard to relax. Earlier in life, you might have ignored it to keep things smooth. Now, your nervous system refuses to settle because it's reading the relational environment accurately. It's saying, this isn't right. To bring in something that ties all of this together, because without it, people can end up believing that they're just becoming less social or less warm. The final piece to the puzzle is purpose and meaning, and how that changes conversation after 50. In earlier adulthood, we often have a sense that everything is building. We're building careers, families, identities, social circles, routines. Conversation supports that building. It helps us network, connect, coordinate, keep things running. Later in life, the question subtly shifts from what am I building to what matters now. Meaning shift. And when meaning becomes the filter, conversations change. You start noticing how many conversations are about maintaining appearances, maintaining old stories, maintaining emotional patterns, maintaining the illusion of closeness without actual intimacy. And your system starts to reject it, not out of bitterness, but out of hunger for something real. It also changes what you're willing to tolerate. When you know your time is precious, you become less interested in conversations that drain you and more interested in conversations that leave you grounded. You become less interested in proving your point and more interested in peace. You become less interested in being right and more interested in being aligned. That doesn't make you passive, it actually makes you wise. This is where the most powerful reframe comes in. If conversation feels harder after 50, it might not be a problem to fix. It might be a signal to honor. It might be your nervous system telling you to stop forcing connection that isn't mutual. It might be your identity telling you to stop playing roles that you've outgrown. It may be your values telling you that you're done paying for belonging with self-abandonment. And if you're listening to me right now and thinking, okay, but what do I do with this? Here's what I want you to hear. You don't have to become isolated. You don't have to become hard. You don't have to cut everyone off. You simply have to let your relationship with conversations evolve. The same way that your relationship with your body evolves, your relationship with food evolves, your relationship with what matters evolves. You're allowed to prefer depth now. You're allowed to need quiet now. You're allowed to leave conversations that feel like emotional work shifts. You're allowed to stop explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You're allowed to love someone and still not have the capacity for their patterns. You're allowed to choose peace without being cruel. And you're also allowed to grieve the fact that some conversations will never be what you wish they were. That grief doesn't mean you failed. It means that you grew. It means that your system is no longer satisfied with surface connection. It means your life is asking for a new kind of relational truth. If conversations feel harder after 50, please don't interpret that as decline. Interpret it as discernment. Interpret it as your nervous system becoming more precise. Interpret it as your identity becoming more solid. Interpret it as your emotional economy becoming more honest. And interpret it as a sign that you're stepping into connection by choice, not by obligation. Because the goal is not to talk more. The goal is to connect better. The goal is to leave conversations feeling more like yourself, not less. The goal is to stop treating depletion as normal and start treating regulation as the standard. Now, if this hit you in a real way, I want you to do something simple. Drop a comment and tell me what part made you feel seen, or what part made you go, oh, wow, that's me. And if you know someone who's saying, I don't know why I'm so tired after socializing lately, share this with them, because sometimes the most healing thing is realizing that you're not broken, you're just recalibrating. And as always, be good to yourself, be good to others, and keep loving life over 50.